Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing. Hey there, everybody. I am, as I always say, so excited to be here today on the Empathic Mastery Show because I have another stellar guest. Ulrika Sullivan is a former scientist turned author, intuitive spiritual life coach, yoga teacher, and energy healer. She's our kind of person. She is passionate about helping busy women to connect with their intuition, energy, and true selves to find inner calm, self-love, and life balance so they can live from the heart with more ease and flow. Ulrika is the author of Wisdom Beyond What You Know, How to Shift from Being Driven by the Mind to Living from the Heart and Intuition. She's the creator of New Light Living, See Your Life in a New Light podcast, and founder of the Beyond the Mind membership community. Ulrika, welcome. I am so glad you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here having a conversation with you today.
Me too. And so I want to, one of the things that when you were sort of reaching out to me about being on this show that really jumped out at me was the relationship to choosing a career, being a scientist, but choosing a career that's misaligned for us and the ways that we sometimes as empaths find ourselves in the wrong places. So, talk to me, tell me your story.
Yes. And I think what you're pointing out here is so common that we find ourselves in a situation, whether it's career or relationship or anything else, that I don't really thrive here. And my story is really one of being, I would say, focused on success and how success is defined by society or expectations from the outside of us. And that's often where many of us are starting, right? We look out when we're young. I mean, my career started, after college, and, you find your way and you're looking outside yourself for something that looks like the right thing. Mm-hmm. And for me, it started within the scientific world. I wasn't really, targeting to go into science, really. I as many times we end up in a field that we do because of decisions we've made in the past. And as a young person, we don't really know sometimes, am I taking somebody else's advice? And often we do that, yes. Right?
Yes.
Before we connect with our true self. So that's what happened for me. And I must say, I was not despising it from the start, if you will. I've never really despised being in a scientific career or a business environment. However, after many years, I noticed that I was really drained. Mm-hmm. I was really struggling a lot more than what I wanted to at the end of the day. And it took many, many years for me to realize that I did struggle, that I did put in more energy than what I really should be doing, like to live well and thrive.
Right.
Because it was so easy to just push through and ignore all the signals of my body, ignore signals from my true self, my higher self. And I think if you're listening or watching to this, you may relate to that it's so easy, and we've been, trained, or it's just an expectation, especially as a woman sometimes, to really just suck it up, right? And push through.
Right.
So for me, that went on for many, many years. And it came to a point where I knew that there is something more for me, but it was likely my soul, my subconscious started to okay, it's time soon to start expanding from what you're doing. And what you're doing is just not it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I ended up being very disconnected from my passion. Like somebody asked me, for example, a number of years ago, Ulrika, what do you do for fun? And I did not have an answer.
Wow. Yeah.
Because everything in my life was focused around my career, my young family at the time, and I was not part of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Me as an individual or person or my well-being. It was like everything else went just ahead
Right.
of me, and I never got to me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I want to backpedal a little bit in terms of you as a highly sensitive empathic person. I know you identify as an empath and an intuitive. And I find it so fascinating that you opted to go in the direction of science because, at least in my experience, I've absolutely known a number of people who are in like tech and science who are have a spiritual bent. I've also known a lot of people in the science world who think that all of this stuff that you and I are talking about is total hooey and that there's just no support whatsoever. I actually, when I was an undergraduate, I went to art school for a while and I was living in Cleveland and the Case Western Reserve dorms, and I was dating an engineering major. And he was constantly invalidating my experience, constantly sort of being like, thinking that like my ability to pick up on things was an overactive imagination. And so I'm actually really curious, like, did you know you were an empath? Were you already intuitive and psychic and went into science? And what was it like being in the scientific world that has a tendency to really dismiss all of this, the woo stuff? Like, that's just one of the things I'm like, that must have been really hard.
Yeah. For me personally, I was not identifying myself at the time. And we're thinking here 20 years back in time when I was not really seeing myself that way. And the language, the terminology around it was not really out there at the time.
No, it was not at all. You could find it on Star Trek Space 1999, but not many other places.
Right. So I did not really, see that difference between I'm really this and here I am in this environment. I did not, because I was so immersed in that environment of logic, results, things like that, right? So there was never really until, recent years that reflection that that there's so much more here that matters. Because it is like our mind focuses on what we believe is important.
Yes.
And the mind wants us to ignore the rest, right? And what I know now that there's so much more, that is an insight that I came to a number of years ago. But back then, it was not part of my vocabulary, if you will. So I wasn't reflecting upon that I'm different. I just ignore that side.
Wow. And we all know how ignoring that side has a tendency to backfire on us horribly. But I'm really curious about, like it sounds like you kind of found yourself in science. You were following along with sort of the plan. And I think you were the people pleasing side of that. And you didn't necessarily know that you were different. You didn't necessarily identify as highly sensitive and empathic yet, but you were feeling all of it. So I'd love to talk about, like, especially if somebody's listening to this and they're identifying, like, I really would love to talk about, like, what were kind of the red flags or warning signs or like the beginnings of your wake up calls? Like, how did you start noticing that you were misaligned with what you were doing?
Such a great question. And the way I noticed it was that I came home and it was at the time where nobody was working from home, right? After a long working day.
Right.
I was always exhausted. I was always very, I would say, scattered, if you will, in my mind for all the impressions during the day, but also the intense focus. That's just how my energy is displaying itself in that in that environment, very focused. And I can kind of almost go into a tunnel vision to accomplish what I believed I needed to do. And with that complete ignoration of my own needs, that's how I came to kind of a rock bottom at the end of the day, because you can only ignore your own needs for so long.
Yes.
So those were the signs, right? I noticed that I was extremely tired. And I just thought, like many with me, that's just a result. I mean, a few years ago.
That's just how it goes. Everybody's tired.
That's how it is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And we know this many years ago, this conversation and trainings around managing stress, right? That's was the terms that were used, that it's just a normal thing to be under this pressure if you want to be successful. So, that was a normal for me, and never did I really, reflect upon that. Is this really right for me? How am I feeling about this way of going about my day? And it wasn't until, much later when I realized that I have options.
Yeah.
And this is not really how my natural energy is working. And I have, got opportunities later on to turn that completely around, to be more aligned with how my natural energy works. And, but just having experienced that complete kind of struggle, almost feeling like you have to elbow yourself through your day but feeling that it's normal. And believing it's normal. Yeah.
I really want to hold that out about the fact that you were just like going through the motions and like dragging basically your zombie butt to work on a daily basis, but assuming that this is just the way it is, like, and that, just like suck it up, show up, do the thing. But you said a word or two words that really piques my curiosity, which is you said, until you hit bottom. And so please, like, what did that look like for you? I know for some people that can be a health crisis, that for some people it can be finding yourself in everything in your life is unraveling. What did hitting bottom look like for you?
Yes. My bottom, of course, because since I was very identified with work, my self-identification was that. Of course, my rock bottom happen, and this is how it often happens. It happens where it matters the most for us. And for me, it was my career. Basically, what happened was I did not see it coming that I would be, laid off from my work because of a restructuring, or I just couldn't see it coming. It was a complete surprise for me because, this tunnel vision, this autopilot, and I did not believe it could happen to me, or it wasn't even on my radar, but it did. And some people may think, oh, well, it's just a job. You can just get another one. But for me, it was ripping me of my self-identity.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I'm hearing like you made so many bargains. You made so many compromises of who you were. And I'm hearing in my head, like there was this part of you that was like, I was being the good girl. I was doing all the things they wanted me to do. And yet they just pulled the rug right out from under me. Like, can I trust anything now? Because the sense I get is that you were like the model employee. You followed all the rules. And as an empath, you could sense the rules, you could sense the things. And so I'm imagining you kind of really thought that like, you would get to choose whether you'd stay or go. And you were the one who was like, well, I'm just going to keep sucking it up and kicking the can down the road because, because like, I'm really good at this. And so for the universe to be sort of the agent of change and go, no, you do not belong in this job.
Right.
I can only imagine.
But it was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? That's often what happens when you're offered up this opportunity to kind of, because I know by myself, I would not have made that change, right? Until much later, likely. So the universe had to step in and say, okay, we're going to sweep this clear so that you get a choice here. And here I am. I made the choice now.
Well, and how wonderful that you got to make the choice, that, you know, the universe sort of offered this to you, and you didn't double down on science and go back there and try to force it. Because, I mean, I've just seen so many people where when they ignore these things, they don't leave the marriage, they don't leave the job, they don't follow their heart's desire. There is a certain point where the inevitable trajectory is going to be like a stroke, heart attack, or cancer. That, you know, it's like, if we don't honor our truth, eventually our body is going to take us out. So I'm so glad that you were able to honor that. I'm also wondering about the, you know, like, I know that there's that old, I don't know if you've ever heard the joke, you know, when God closes one door, they open another, but the punchline is, but the hallways are a bitch. And a lot of times people don't talk about the hallways. And I'm kind of imagining that you, like, so you're doing this job, you're exhausted and you're burned out, but you know it's what you're supposed to do, and you're getting all kinds of sort of intellectual and emotional strokes for being really good at what you're doing. So your identity is all about this, and then suddenly it's like the rug is just pulled out from under you, and you don't even know what's fun. What was that period? Like, I'm sure there was a period where you really were like spinning out before you started finding that path. And I'd love to hear both about the period of the in between and like what it really felt like to not have any idea. And then sort of like, where were the breadcrumbs that started leading you towards your heart's desire?
Yes, that period after this happened was a complete, like, who am I?
Yeah.
And it was hard because I knew that there was a change coming. I could sense that, and now was my chance. So that was, my subconscious told me that, okay, this is it. But I had no idea. I knew I could get a job just like the one I had right away. And as a matter of fact, I did go back to a job just like that. But what was different, like, just to kind of survive, right, in terms of finances, but what I knew when I took that second job in the same industry and was that I am now on an journey of evolution, transformation. I knew that, and I knew that job that I was taking as a, you know, rescue after this rock bottom was not it. I knew that. So that kicked off my journey of discovery. And you asked me about how did I, you know, come into this right next step.
Yeah.
And the universe wasn't going to leave me hanging, right? So what happened was that I started to now notice synchronicities come up. And I think just with this whole rock bottom, it opened up something in me that, okay, pay attention now. Because I can give you an example that was profound. I started to sign up for things like a workshop in New York on my own. Like, it was very uncharacteristic of me, but it was like a spiritual workshop, right? And I drove down to New York and had a wonderful weekend. And on the way home, driving, like, I was singing in the car, and it's like, you know, I was like, really, this has been so different and so wonderful, right? I connected with it. I saw this billboard. Don't wait, make a plan. It's like, what? And it was like, so things like that just started to show up. And after that, I was in some, you know, a few weeks later, a couple of weeks, I was in this Facebook group, and there was people asking questions or whatever. And there was someone asking about, like, how do you become a life coach? Like, it was some other topic this group was about. And somebody gave a link, like, check it out here. I have experience. My friend has experience from it. And there was this link, and you know how it can feel sometimes. You just have to click that link.
Yes.
And there it was, right? It led me to my next career, just that move. And I got absorbed by that website I got into. And it's like, I started to, and there were multiple things along the way, this runway or this hallway you were asking about, that showed itself to me. And I started to trust these signs and synchronicities that came up. And, I couldn't miss it. Like, that's how universe usually, when you're open to see what's next for you, you can't miss it.
Yeah, you can't miss it.
So that's what happened to me. And, that led me to starting my own business and overlapping that with my, rescue job for a while until I could fly on my own. So, but what you were asking about too is, well, like, how was that process? And I think the biggest difference was that there was something here that opened me up to a self-awareness that was at a different level than before, so that I could take in what was shown to me. And thanks for that, universe.
Well, and I'm curious. Part of me is curious what your zodiac sign is, your sun sign.
Yeah, I'm a Virgo sun.
You're Virgo, of course. Yeah. And were you going to say Taurus moon or something? Or
Taurus moon, yeah.
So I'm a Capricorn sun with Virgo rising. And as I was listening to you, I'm like, I have had the experience in my own life of like an event like that where you can see the writing on the wall, like your exit pay purse have been handed to you. And you know that you're doing something that is a temporary solution, but you're leveraging your way to something much, much better. And so I really hear that shock of being pulled out from this trajectory that your career had been going in and your sense of self had been going in really was like the wake up call you needed to then go, okay, I'm going to do something really different than what I had been doing here. And I love that you also recognize that you needed, as you call it, the rescue job. I've heard people call it like the B job. But like, I think I've actually seen, this is sort of a whole other tangent, but I've seen so many people who think that they have to start their entrepreneurial venture, like just off the bat and expect it to make money. And the truth is that a lot of times we need to leverage our way into the new career and know that it's going to be an incremental process. So I want to hear about like, when did you started experiencing the synchronicities? When did you start embracing your identity as an empath and an intuitive? Like, at what point did that really, like, you were like, oh, this is what I am?
Yeah.
And how did you realize that this is what you are?
Yeah, I started so there's multiple things that came together, right? I also trained, I've been, practicing yoga for a number of years in the past, but in this whole runway or this hallway, I also became a yoga teacher. So that brought me even more closer to connect the body with my soul and mind. Like, it all came together. And I naturally also started to pick up, because I'm a lifelong learner, right? I always learn. I started to pick up astrology. I started to pick up tarot or oracle, like naturally just connecting back with those types of tools, skills for myself, because I now knew that that's how I am operating in this world, right? I'm using this sense of intuition in the way I want to be guided, not like making the plan or setting the goals or, limit myself to plan 1 to 10, right? So I started to change the way I approach my own day. And I think that the biggest example was, for example, my mornings. In the past, if you were me in the past, I had my phone on the nightstand, posted, with 10 things on already and maybe 5 added over the course of the night. When the alarm clock rang, I ran up, in the shower, grab a cup of coffee and out the door, drive to work. Like, you can feel that pace. Like, there was no room for this connection with yourself. Now, that then evolved into what I do today. I have a very long morning nowadays, tuning into my guides, using cards. I read astrology, like my own astrology, looking out the course of the day, the week, the month, whatever, right? So that's how I relate to my world and reading energy in that sense now. So it's not only like I naturally just picked up these tools, if you will, which is a knowledge about moon cycles and, all these things that I do nowadays, energy healing and my bookshelf looks completely different now than just, many years ago. It would look, yeah. It's all these healing arts, if you will.
I think that for so many of us, there is this karmic past life connection to these things. And it's like we pick these things up and it just comes automatically. I remember when I realized for myself with tarot, because I started reading tarot cards when at the age of 19, I picked up my first deck. But what I discovered was I was sort of signed up to take a tarot class with somebody at the university. That was like an extracurricular thing. And I realized that after only a couple months of having played with cards, I knew more than the teacher did. And I was like, I understood the cards in a way that he did not. So I totally hear you. I'm actually wondering, and it sounds like there was just this natural organic experience for you. Did you experience any internal or external pushback from the science mind, from this is not quantifiable, this is not reality, like that kind of agnostic atheist, there's no such, it's like if you don't have a double blind study for it, it's not going to be real. Was that something you were up against either both internally and externally, or just internally or just externally? But did you experience pushback coming out of, the whole science culture and the way that it tends to just the whole opposition of science versus spirituality has struck me as being absurd, but there are a lot of people who really don't see think of them as oil and water.
So during this period of time when I did both, if you will, I built up my business and dove into that space, keeping the other job, so to say. That's when I kind of struggled a little bit with, can I talk about this, right? With my current job, and here they should only know what I'm into, like when I go home over the weekend when I worked on my business and growing there. But I never really got like a question mark from anyone at work. They knew that I was into yoga. They knew I was into meditation. But that was pretty much it that I talked about at work. And there was acceptance about that. But so nobody has really come up to me and say like, you're out there, which is good. And my husband is very open-minded. He's also in the scientific field, if you will, but he's also very open-minded in the sense that he knows that there's more. And once I decided to, leave that second job and go for my business full time, I don't really expose myself to a potential challenge there. And even if somebody would be challenging me or doesn't agree, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine with me. But because right now there's nothing there was this point of no return. And I write about it in the book too. Like when we've come to that point where there's no going back, we know that there's nothing that can pull me out of that inner knowing that I have now. I think this challenge, and you asked about my inner process as well. Yes, sometimes because I'm a very logical minded person, and that's not going to go away, but I can definitely more so than before notice when I'm on this track of logical reason, if you will, that is very limited in a way. And I can also notice, obviously, when I'm in this more unlimited energy, right? So I know myself, okay, now Ulrika, you're in your mind, kind of go ground yourself a little bit and come back to the heart. So nowadays, I don't feel that inner conflict or challenge between science or esoteric topics at all. And I feel very grounded in where I'm at. What I do feel though is that it's everything that I went through, and I'm sure you can agree to that before, has led me up to be able to relate in the way I do now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And how also having the ability to bridge the gap between the sort of ordinary world and the spiritual world, and to be able to speak in language that is accessible to people feels so incredibly important. And I've certainly seen there are people who are doing incredible spiritual work and using language that is so flowery and so woo that it doesn't make sense to somebody if they're just starting to try to find their way. And it makes it feel like this is like you're on a completely different planet than me. And I think your experience sounds to me like you really had the opportunity to understand the perspective and the language of a different culture and viewpoint, which then creates bridges for people that are just so incredibly important. I was thinking about, the inner critic and just like the places in our life where we do self-center or self-censor. And, and I was wondering if developmentally, you kind of got to come into the ease of your business in a way that, like, for those of us who sort of cut our teeth in our emotional and sort of like social development as adults, we're navigating the spiritual path at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a certain amount of like self-doubt that's just part of the age. Because I think about when I was first working as a psychic and getting people, like I would inevitably have these skeptical men who'd come along and who'd try to throw me, like where they wanted to be blown away. Like they wanted to be wowed, but they also really wanted to like poke holes in me, because it was like part of them wanted to believe and part of them really wanted to confirm that this was complete bullshit. But I know that when I first experienced that as a younger person, I was so flappable. It was so easy to lose my confidence because these people were just, they were bullies. And what I'm wondering as I'm hearing you is if in some ways you kind of got to work through those boundaries and standing up for yourself within the tech, in the science world. And so by the time you came into this work, you were way, way, way less likely to suffer fools.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I think you're absolutely right there that it's about this, I feel that it's about this personal boundary that I was able to develop, and a strong inner wisdom that, I can accept whatever position anybody has without waver, because that's their view, right? And definitely I can sense if somebody is out to kind of try to poke a hole, right? And I can sense that even before they open their mouth, but it's very rare that somebody like that is coming in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, I'm sure you by now exactly know the same thing, right? You don't have to kind of.
I'm just like, sure, you want to spend your money. I'm kind of like, you want to spend your money? No problem. Knock yourself out. But I don't tend to attract people like that anymore either, just because I just don't care. Whereas when I was younger, for me, I came from a family on my father's side, of atheists, and I grew up with a lot of skepticism. And so I was sort of like basically going back and sort of like recapitulating and revisiting the wound over and over again to try to prove that what I had to say and do was valid. Yeah. And so I was attracting these kinds of mostly men with this attitude where they were trying to poke holes in things. I mean, I can't even count the number of relationships I was in with skeptics and scientifically oriented men.
Yeah.
But I really love the unflappableness of your boundaries as you're speaking about this, and just the confidence that you came, that you cultivated and developed. Yeah.
One thing that also I see more often than those that are trying to poke a hole in me is those clients or people that are coming to me that don't want to see their own truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, because many times I sense their truth, right? But that's the process that I often help them navigate, how to get to their own truth truth and be able to see that truth with love. And so that they can either release what needs to be released or embrace themselves as they are. And that's a different, a person who comes to me who are not really there yet in terms of really clearly see their own truth. That's a different situation. Then, it's about allowing them to unravel, basically. And sometimes that person can show up as a skeptic, but I see that it's really their own journey that it's about, not mine.
Not yours. Exactly. Yeah. One of the things that you said a little while back was you were talking about sort of being able to accept that people are where they're at, that they have their perspectives, they have their opinions, and it is what it is. I know from having so many conversations over this last couple years that a lot of empathic people are really conflicted about the fact that you've got people with really differing opinions. And honestly, some people where it really seems like they're deeply misinformed, like their perception of reality is kind of like, how are you seeing the world through that lens? Like, how does that even make sense to you? And I know that there are a lot of people who really, as empaths especially, like struggle with that, the difference of people's opinions. And especially like, what I've seen is like, even if they intuitively, instinctively know what their truth is, I've seen again and again, and particularly it was interesting in regards to social distancing, mask wearing, and all of this, that I would see people who would know what felt safe and right and what their personal boundary was. But then when like a friend is like, hey, I'm going to have this indoor party. Oh, by the way, my kid was exposed to COVID the other day, but come on, the more the merrier, that they would doubt themselves, that they would find themselves like, so that there's this tension of being around other people's opinions that can sometimes, like for many empaths, like make you question your own truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that this is just such an incredibly broad topic. But I'd love to hear more about, like, how have you come to peace with your truth, but also the fact that there are some people whose truths maybe like seem really just misaligned or downright nuts.
Yeah, this is so important to have a conversation about because it's often in immediate family situations or people that we really love and, that this tension can come up. And my advice, or I'm not really giving advice here, but what I've learned is...
Yeah, your experience, strength, and hope with this one.
Yes.
Yeah.
What I've learned is that it's so, so important to learn the skills of detachment. Because, and I can wholeheartedly relate to how hard it is in the moment not entangle ourselves with and be upset about somebody's opinion, especially if it's somebody that we're really connected with energetically, because that's often what it is, codependent energetics that are going on. It is to start really observe ourselves and what that dynamic does to us. And ultimately, there are, and you are such a great teacher in this too, that we all need to learn those tools on how to detach us from people we love without feeling that the love is gone, right?
Right.
It's an energetic thing.
Or feeling like we're betraying them.
Yes, and it's an energetic thing. But as an empath, we're so connected to our emotions. And it really is the emotional part that we have to learn that detachment. And often it's also at the energetic level. So the tools there are our responsibility to learn.
Yeah.
Because it's not a responsibility for others to provide those tools to us. It's our responsibility to learn how to manage our own energy in that sense and emotions. But, it's hard. And it's a commitment to ourselves on allowing ourselves to thrive, because what I experienced many, many years was that I put myself at the bottom of the list in terms of how I felt, how I let others treat myself, or situations that I allowed myself to go into. For example, the pushing through, right? So it's about becoming self-aware of our own dynamic. And empaths are very often very aware of that dynamic, but there is not enough power, if you will, sometimes in terms of self-empowerment to manage that within ourselves. But I believe that any empath can learn how to be sovereign energetically. That's my true belief, because I've seen it over and over again, helping people navigate this.
Well, and I really believe that in order for us to turn the ship around on this planet and to actually make a difference, every empath is going to have to learn how to be sovereign. Because when we are not sovereign and when we are engaging in the codependency and the absorbing the thoughts and the feelings, we are contributing to the problem. We are not part of the solution. And, as you were speaking about the idea of this has got to come from within, like we need to be willing to do the work to find detachment. I was thinking it's like if we're looking to the outside, we're still externalizing things. And so much of the work is about like managing and navigating and having control over our own energy, which being sovereign with our own energy. As you're talking about, for my listeners, for these people, like, you're talking about learning the skills of detachment. Could you give us a really kind of like, I don't know, sort of done and dusted, but just sort of like really simple, like the very first baby steps of detachment? Like, what does that look like? And maybe even like an example of like, my mother-in-law called me, like how, like, could you give us an example of like the first baby steps of how to work on detachment?
Yeah. And it starts in the mind and our beliefs. I've learned often that it's what we believe that we can do or others can do. And the belief often of being entangled, if you will, is that our belief that we can change others, for example, is very rooted in that I have to have this connection with somebody because I want them to be different, or I can help them.
I can help them.
I can help them. And that belief starts with a change of that belief and the willingness to shift that into what I am versus what they are.
Well, and I love how, because this is an audio only podcast, right over Ulrika's head is a framed image with just simply the word trust, period. And I'm just really thinking that at the core of it is also this idea that, we're not this person's higher power, that we are not the savior. We are not the person who's going to rescue them, and trusting that the universe has a plan, even for this person who appears to be a complete hot mess. And it is not our responsibility to rescue them. And I know that there are people in my life, like most people, I believe, have a higher power in their life and I'm not it. And that they are going to be able to sort it out, that they're on a path, that they're on the right place. But there's just a couple of those people where it's like that person is like where sort of like the rules don't apply. And, it's like, how deeply do we trust that we can let this person do their thing and not be the one who's responsible for it?
Yes, that's beautifully said. Because once we realize that, and that we believe that the other person, whoever it's a mother-in-law or a mom and often it's immediate family that we have these engagement with.
Oh, yeah.
But once we start to see that they have their own journey and that we are here to observe that journey and decide how we want to respond to that journey, but it's not of us, then it becomes more of an exercise of observation and instead of merging with it. So and this is more energetics than anything, right? How we love that person is it's not the same thing. You can still have immense love for a person, but be detached. It's not about being like, I don't want to see you anymore. It's not about that, because the ultimate test is to be in the same environment with this person that you've always been and see it differently.
Mm.
So that's, or see it differently in the sense that you sense the energetics differently within yourself. That's the ultimate test.
Do you have a concrete example that you'd be comfortable sharing with us about like that transformation for you?
Absolutely. I write about it in my book. And for example, it's my relationship with my mom. And I love my mom. She is an outgoing Leo. So, and her influence on me growing up was very strong, right? Because her personality is that she knew that she was right and she knew what was best for me, right? So younger years, that was very imprinted in me. So I see now that my journey was also through work was, also perpetuating this, because what do you do for fun, Ulrika? I don't know. Right? So my relationship with my mom as I grew up to be an adult, I realized, and certainly now, that has really been the ultimate practice for me in detachment in this, because I realized that I cannot change her.
Mm-hmm.
What I can change is the way I allow her to influence me or not. Right. So, because she's still the outgoing Leo that knows what's right. Right.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I'm an empowered woman that has my own inner truth, and we still get along really, really well. But the internal process within me is not one of frustration or feeling small or taking her advice for truth or anything like that. But in the past, I did.
Mm.
So it's a very personal example, but
Yes.
the difference is within me. And that is, part of this journey to sovereignty, that we can be in the same room as the person who really annoys us or have done all these things that have made us upset, and feeling that we have a different inner process to it. Does that help?
Yes, definitely. Well, and I was just thinking about, I think it was Ram Dass. I'm probably going to not quote him precisely, but basically something that Ram Dass essentially said is, if you want to figure out or know how spiritual you are, go spend a weekend with your parents or your family. Like, just go back to your family, because that's where you're going to that's where the rubber does absolutely hit the road. Are we reacting or are we responding? Are we giving away our power or are we sovereign? So, Ulrika, I cannot believe how fast this conversation has gone by. And I really wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about your book and sharing like that, that amazing thing. So tell us about your book, please.
Yes. And my book is called Wisdom Beyond What You Know: How to Shift from Being Driven by the Mind to Living from the Heart and Intuition. That's pretty much what I teach nowadays. That's the framework. And in this book is valuable because it gives 7 inner shifts with it's an actionable spiritual self-help book. Because as you mentioned earlier, sometimes when we read spiritual books, they're like very, a language that we can't really bring down to our daily lives. And for me, being a triple earth, I'm a Taurus rising as well. So it's,
oh my goodness. Yeah.
For me, it's all about bringing this spiritual perspective that there is more than what we don't have to be in this pushing, mind-driven way. And we can bring it down to our daily life. So that's why the book is including my own stories, but also, analysis and practical exercises that actually makes a difference, that anyone who reads the book or will want to work through the book can get true value from. So, yeah. And the first part of the book is really helping readers to identify these mind-driven patterns, because often it is those patterns and habits that we have that maybe be not really known they are known, but we're not aware of them. And then the second part of the book gives the fundamentals of heart-centered living, a number of chapters emphasizing, the importance of connecting to our passion, creativity, inspiration, intuition, our connection with nature, a lot of different things that we may have not thought of really makes a difference. And the shift in all of this is laid out in part 3 of the book, which is 7 inner shifts to multidimensional living, basically, which is, when we see ourselves at the top of the mountain in our own life, we can then connect with our higher guidance. And that's pretty much what is in this book and why it's important.
It sounds like a delightful book. And I love the fact that it has multiple parts, where the first part is explaining things and really giving people an capacity to grasp this. And then the next part is giving us tools. And then the last part is really talking about the 7 principles. In my book is actually somewhat similar in that the first part is really the why and the second part is the how. And I think that having actionable steps is really interesting or really essential. I have to say there's a part of me that's like, I really want to hear, like, if you could give us sort of like a real kind of like almost like thumbnail, like nutshell, like even bullet points are like, what are the 7 principles? Like, are they a single word? Like,
so really what they are, the 7 shifts, the 7 shifts, they start kind of in an order, so that the first shift, for example, is to go from that comfort zone to commitment.
From comfort zone to commitment.
Yeah, and it builds upon all these, it's almost like a rubber band, right?
Yeah.
The comfort zone is the rubber band that we try to stretch, but then there's something that makes us go back.
Yes.
And what I teach here in this first shift is to not, like, that point of no return that I was talking about, when you feel there's no going back. That's the commitment that you want to shift into for a change, a transformation, right? But as long as we go back and forth between this, well, I'm going to make a commitment, and then the rubber band pulls us back, which is really our mind pulling us back to the comfort zone, right? So that's the first shift. And then it takes off after that, becoming self-aware, how to go from that disconnection, if you will, from our higher self to self-awareness. Like, who am I? What am I here to do? All of those beautiful discoveries that we can make about ourselves. And then we move on to becoming sovereign. And we talked about that. The sovereignty is so critical in terms of how we view ourselves and how we approach our day. So that I teach that in shift 3. And then, how many of us are learners? I am a lifelong learner, and it's easy to keep, staying in this learning mode and not embody what we've learned.
Right. Not becoming the expert or the master,
Yeah.
but just constantly thinking we need to be a seeker instead of a provider, a server.
So the key here is, as you say, I teach how to kind of, what do you need to become, rather than just keep seeking. And the rest of it is really, I teach how to go from that logic to using your wisdom that you already came here with, and tapping into that. And then what everybody is on the spiritual path often jumping to very prematurely is manifesting, to go from that pushing to manifest, to actually start attracting what you are, what you need, instead of like that pushing mentality that we were talking about. So I teach that in shift. And then from seeing ourselves, the last shift is about seeing ourselves as an individual, to multidimensional, where we are really aligned with it all.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell.
Oh. Thank you, Ulrika. And we are at the top of the hour already. This has been such a delicious conversation. It's been so wonderful. Thank you for being so real, so present, for being so candid with us and sharing your story. It's just been delightful. So how do people, and all this information is going to be in the show notes, guys, so no worries, but how do people get in touch with you?
So you're welcome to visit my website, ulrikasullivan.com. And on there, I have, if you're interested in tapping more into your intuition and starting this journey of shifting from your mind down to the heart, is I have a little 7-step guide on where I give my 7 shifts, if you will, in a short form, how to listen to your intuition. So go check that out there on my website.
Thank you so much. So you guys, ulrikasullivan.com. Go over there, go sign up for her awesome stuff, and let her know that I sent you. Awesome. Ulrika, thank you so much. This has just been such a delightful conversation.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.